No one's going to ask me to leave an iPad behind.
Nope.
But if they say, can you leave your pitch behind? I'm an asshole if I say no, but you really should not do it.
Here's one thing that someone asked us to do. We mentioned it, and then they said, yes, please do an episode on pitching. And I think that the craft of pitching is something that we should do an entire episode on.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think that we talked about IP last time, I believe, or 2 times ago. I was thinking maybe we can talk about the business of pitching, what it looks like in terms of the different stages of pitching, the length, the rules, the various ideas that people have, the difference between pitching a movie versus pitching a TV show, which very different.
Yeah.
You and I, Jake and I, were quite successful selling pitches for most of our career. We've actually only sold 2 spec screenplays, Winter's Night and The Princess, and all of the rest of the work that we've gotten has been pitching. Some originals, which is also different than on IP and adaptations.
Yes.
And I think it's important to understand a few things about pitching. So the first thing is that when you're pitching a movie to a studio, you're pitching them essentially what you will write when they hire you.
Yes.
So the way it works is you're pitching them a movie, and if they think that that movie is something that they would want to make, the way it's then constructed is that they then hire you to write your own idea, but they claim that that is their idea, and that is
it's a legally it's not a legal gray area. That's the moment that we have arrived to in terms of our contract, and there are reasons that actually you want that. One of which is because technically you are then an employee of the studio. You are doing a work for hire, and therefore you get things like unions and all the stuff that you get as being a member of the WGA, which includes residuals, credit protection, pension and health benefits, plus a myriad of other benefits as well. So yes, it's one of those slightly odd things. And actually, even when you have spec something as well, there is a moment where they say, well, this was written under a work for hire. So
that's right. And so there is this thing that can happen whereby you pitch an idea. They love the idea. They want to buy the idea. Wonderful. You sign the contracts. The idea becomes theirs. And then they come back to you and say, well, we'd like to change the idea. And you go, well, we sold you a pitch. You've hired us to write the pitch. Well, yes, but what we really liked was the broad idea. We need to recraft the entire thing. And here's, again, from
it has to be the entire thing, but there might be an element they want. They might say, no, we really want a love story. Can you focus a bit more on X, Right.
Or like our experience on the House of the Scorpion, it was literally, we need to recraft the entire pilot. Even though we've just sold a pitch of the show. Now that's a little bit different because they were buying a series and not just a pilot. So it was a little bit different. But the interesting thing about, I think, pitches versus screenplays from a business perspective is that the buyers feel much more in control of essentially having their say much earlier on with a pitch. That can be scary and also exciting. So on the one hand, I think screenplays will sell potentially easier if it's really good and the buyer goes, oh, it's already here. I only need to make a few adjustments.
Unless it's this concept is so great. Right. While the script might not fully live up to that concept, the idea is so great that we have to have this idea.
Right.
You know, and we've heard examples of big movies where that's happened from the producers who are like, the original script wasn't that great, but the idea was so great we knew that we could hopefully get it.
Edge of Tomorrow is an example of that.
Totally.
The Tom Cruise movie.
Sure.
And that's a crazy story, actually. Look it up online. It's one crazy story. But, you know, I think, so basically, here's the lowdown of at least how we've gone about selling pitches. You have an idea. It's great. Usually for us, you're in a general meeting with a producer. Generals are what writers do to meet or reconnect with people that are producers primarily, sometimes studio executives. We've had generals with those too, but most of your generals end up being with producers. I'd love more generals with directors. It just doesn't seem to happen that often. We've only had a couple. And so you'll pitch out your you hear the term elevator pitch all the time. And I think the elevator pitch is important. It does not there is no rule.
What's an elevator pitch, Ben?
An elevator pitch is something short, easy to understand, that encapsulates the concept, the thing what's the trailer? It's basically a trailer for your pitch, right? And
it comes from the idea that you happen to step into an elevator with an executive, and you have until the time they get off of the elevator to get your idea out. That's where the name comes from. So you're thinking, can you say the idea of your movie in about 20 to 30 seconds?
And those can be anywhere from it's this meets that, or a little bit longer, this character who goes on this adventure that is really amazing. But the elevator pitch, that short bite, is what's going to hopefully get a producer to go, that's really interesting. Do you have more? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. We have had elevator pitches literally where we've gone in and we attached a producer on a project where it was one sentence. We just had a concept. It was really, really broad. So then if you like the producer, you think they're right for the project, hopefully you didn't pitch them this idea if you didn't think they were right for the project. We've run into that problem as well. You learn from your mistakes. And then you go away and you develop your pitch. Now, again, I think we'll do a whole session on the craft of that. But the business side is then you go back into the producer and you go, here's my pitch. Now, we'll start with features because that's what we're working on right now. Feature stack. Generally speaking, our feature pitches are between 22 and 26 minutes. That's around the time. Now, for us...
and some people, it's interesting, may say that that's too long.
They may. I'd be curious to know how many pitches those people have sold.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I hear people say no more than 20. Well, here's the thing. I think what me and Ben have as an advantage is the fact that there's two of us. Now, what I mean by that is the human brain can only listen to a certain voice without getting distracted and daydreaming for a certain amount of time. But if you add another voice, change voices, you can actually re-engage that person pretty quickly.
So you're
so I think that our pitches don't feel like that length of time because there's two different voices doing that. So I think that has
I think, and there's a lot of obviously different people have different styles and will pitch differently. I think you have a lot more flexibility in a feature pitch. We've definitely learned in terms of how you want to pitch it. We actually have our own little template that maybe we'll decide that we want to share. It's very simple. I'm happy to share it. It's literally, I mean, it's so simple, but it helps us go, here's the structural nature of the pitch. And I think, again, I want to save that for the creative conversation.
I think so too.
But let's say you go in, you pitch your 25 minutes, and the producer goes, I fucking love this, but I have notes.
Yes. Or I have some questions.
I have questions.
Yes.
I don't think we've ever pitched a producer and not had to do another round. using their feedback.
Absolutely right. Yes.
People,
again, just like the studio, they want to feel that they've had input into this project. And again, you know, a lot of the times it's good stuff. You know,
if it's a good producer, it should be good stuff.
They
know what they're talking about.
Absolutely. Yes.
Now, the hard part about that from a business standpoint is you're doing all this for free. And you are now being asked to go back and work on your pitch that you love for free for a producer who is not paying you, and neither is the buyer at the end of the day. But here's the thing, and people can argue this on Twitter all day long. Free work in this context is worth it.
And also, let's be clear, although you're developing it with this producer, it's still your work.
Yes.
This is still your idea. If it doesn't sell, you can go and do whatever you want with it. You can go and write it on spec. You could go and turn it into a graphic novel. You could turn it into a book. You could turn it into a Broadway musical.
Yes.
You know, which we've done.
Not yet. But, you know, you're going to do notes. Let's just be clear. You're going to do notes, and that's okay. And you should not be upset about those notes. You're pushing the ball up. Look, getting anything sold is like pushing a fucking boulder up a hill, right? And the pitch needs to continue to get pushed up that hill. And when that producer loves that pitch, they're going to decide that they want to take it out to the town, or
they may want to package it.
In today's market, packaging is probably your best bet.
What's packaging, Ben?
Yeah, well, packaging's a bitch.
Great answer. What's packaging?
That is the answer. No, so packaging is putting elements onto your project that are going to get a studio or a buyer excited enough that they want to pay you $1 million to write your script for them. Now, they can look in all different.
So it's like you recently bought a new car.
I did,
and you got all the bells and whistles on your new car. You know, it's like, well, do you want the fancy wing mirrors that allow you to see into time and space when you look into them? Do you want the Back to the Future gizmo that helps you travel through time? You know, so basically, it's like, what's going to make this project as appealing as biased as possible? So is it adding a director? Is it adding an actor? In fact, we're taking a script out at the moment this week, hopefully, that has both a director and an actor attached to it. That's called a package, and a producer.
And that's harder to package with a pitch. I mean, let's be clear. It's not impossible, but it is harder. Sometimes you will have pitched a producer who is not necessarily what they call a 800-pound gorilla in this business. So maybe the first packaging element is to go to your producer who's a great development producer but isn't the big gun, and you go and pitch an 800-pound gorilla producer, and you see if you can package that extra producer element that's going to make the studio go, oh, that guy can make this movie. Then you might decide to pitch talent. You know, we had a project that we can't discuss, but the first thing our producer wanted to do was pitch actresses. We thought directors was the way to go. In his opinion, based on the idea that we had, which was very centrally focused on one character, he was like, this lives or dies based on who plays it. So let's go to actresses first. Those pitches can be very hard to get. I do feel like we're in a place now where talent is realizing that they have to attach themselves to these projects ahead of time, because there are just less opportunities. Everything's getting sold with packages. So there aren't opportunities just getting sent their way going, hey, here's a movie. It's already greenlit. Do you want to star in it? The development process has changed to where studios are expecting us as creators to do the work for them. And it used to be really hard to attach to a pitch. Now I do feel like it's getting a little bit easier. But, you know, again, you'll try.
And that would mean that you have to normally pitch either that actor or their team.
Or both.
Or both.
Or three, three hoops. It might be their team, their producing partner, and then them.
And you have to get yeses from all three, obviously.
And these are all hoops. And not only are there hoops, but if you manage to attach this piece of talent, guess what? Notes. You will probably have to go back and tweak your pitch again to satisfy any of this talent's ideas.
Yeah.
And you want to do that. And there's a reason you want to do that.
Absolutely.
Because it makes them feel invested. They want to feel like this is also their project, even though technically it is not. But you want them to feel that way. And it's good. It's great. So now you've got your package, hopefully. What's the next step? Well, hopefully you also have great agents. And those agents and your producer will discuss where to go.
And let's just say as well, if you don't yet have a great agent or an agent that's really working for you, you can use this leverage to try and get one. You could say to your producer, hey, I would really like an agent. I've been trying to get one for a little while. Would you be so kind as to make some referrals for me? And they well might do that. You know, or your manager, again, if you have one at this point, may say, let's try and get you an agent in advance of this selling, because we can use that as leverage to try and get one for you. So again, if you don't have one at this moment, don't panic, you know, but you can use this, you know, as leverage.
And the real difference now at this stage, business-wise, versus a spec, at this moment in the spec selling process, guess what? Your script goes out and people read it, and you sit back and wait. And it actually can be very
horrible.
It's horrible. You have no idea whether they liked it or not. You have no sense of whether they even read it or not. I mean, it's literally, it's like you're just waiting, twiddling your thumbs, going, man, when are we going to hear anything?
Yeah.
With a pitch, the only way you're going to sell it is if you actually get in the room with them. Now it might be on a Zoom room. Back in the day when Jake and I were selling lots of pitches, it was always in their office. And you'll go in, usually with the producer, possibly with the talent, if they're available, but talent is usually unavailable. So a lot of times the talent will call the studio, or they might be on the phone or on the Zoom. We had one pitch over at Sony where our actor was on the phone while we pitched because he was over in Europe somewhere. And you set up these pitches, and you know what's difficult about setting up a pitch, and it really relies on your agent, your manager, or your producer to pre-pitch. So they have to make these phone calls to the studio, and they have to go, I have this idea by Ben and Jake, who sold The Princess not that long ago, and we've attached, you know,
Charlize
Theron to it. Now, in that case, with someone like Charlize Theron, at that moment, they don't even hear the idea. They literally don't care. Oh, if Charlize wants to do it, I'll hear the pitch. But let's say you get actor who is good, a good attachment, tips the needle a little bit, but not Charlize Theron. They'll want to know the idea. You need to have and supply your producer or agent with a log line. Something that they can then use to pitch your pitch. And it's really important, because if they don't get it, how are they going to pitch it?
And it's funny, isn't it? Because we had a viewer a couple of weeks ago saying, at what point do you come up with a log line? You know, do you do it when you're writing it, or do you do it when, you know, and ultimately we might come up with a log, but we won't spend hours working on it. You know, but this is the time when you need that.
And it really is spec or pitch. But the nice thing about a spec is you're going to send the script with the log line. And if the title catches them, or they're sitting on an airplane and they read your first page, you might grab them even if the log line isn't something that they got to. With a pitch, that phone call is all you get. You get a phone call from your agent or your producer saying, hey, executive, I've got this package and I've got these writers and they have a pitch and this is what it's about. Do you want to hear it? Hopefully they say yes. And then you get to go in and pitch it. And then there's a whole...
Then you do your pitch, which should be well rehearsed. You are allowed to bring notes with you. We bring
not have to memorize it.
You don't have to memorize it. Some people do. I know several
You
writers
don't
who do.
have to. That's
You
my.
don't have to. Absolutely, I don't.
No one
think
will judge you. No one's going to say, I'm not going to buy this idea because you're not a good actor and couldn't memorize this pitch.
Now, what they will, mark you up or down on is what happens after the pitch.
Yeah.
Which is the question and answer session. I'll just go back to the pitch for a second, though, for a moment. Me and Ben don't bring in pages, printed out pages. We bring in our iPads. If you don't have an iPad, that's fine. You could bring in some index cards, whatever works for you. I would probably avoid phone because it looks bad, I think, looking at a phone.
Yeah, looking at a phone is weird. You know what?
It feels like a connotation of us not actually. Say again?
Tablets are super cheap. Get a freaking Amazon Fire for $50 to get a PDF on
Now,
it.
there is a reason for this.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have your pitch printed out, they can very easily say, would you mind leaving those pages behind?
Yeah.
Because these pages don't cost you anything. They're not going to ask you to leave your iPad behind.
No, they're not.
But they may well go, could you just leave? And here's the thing. No one's going to ask me to leave an iPad behind.
Nope.
But if they say, can you leave your pitch behind? I'm an asshole if I say no, but you really should not do it.
You shouldn't. Now, but there is a question about leave behinds. Leave behinds have actually started to become more common lately, which is very frustrating. A leave behind is something that you literally leave behind. It is work that you've done. Mm-hmm. Probably nowadays it would be like a deck, and a deck is essentially a lot of images. If you have a director, actually, if a leave behind from the director would be fantastic.
Yeah.
A leave behind from the writer means that we have now put our pitch essentially in narrative form to a certain degree, and put it into a document whereby we are then expressing the movie through images. Mm-hmm. That's what your deck is going to be. Mm-hmm. Again, if you have a director, a leave behind by the director, perfectly acceptable, and actually probably.
And it may include some written work. It may include some plot elements. It might include a log line. It might include a page or two of whatever. It might be. Again, I would advise against a whole written out version of your pitch.
Yeah.
But could there be just enough to get them to go, oh, I remember that. But here's the thing: we worked with a producer briefly a few years ago, and forgive me if I butcher this, Ben, and pick me up, but it was along the lines of, if they can't remember your pitch a couple of days later, it's not good enough.
Yep. That's absolutely right. And it was Lorenzo de Bonaventura, who is one of the great producers of Hollywood. Yeah. And his suggestion for us on the pitch that we did was, make sure there's at least 2 or 3 moments in your pitch that you can't forget. Yeah. They may forget everything else. They may not remember anything else, but if they can go to their boss and be like, dude, there's this amazing moment where the character does blank, that's enough. Yeah. Because the boss, and Lorenzo, I think, used to run a studio before he was a producer.
He was Warner's.
And he used to say, he said, if an executive could come into me and remember 2 things from this pitch, that meant it was good enough for me to hear it.
Yeah.
And that's important. Now, that's again on the creative side, but from a business perspective, your goal in this pitch is for this person that you're pitching, who most likely is not the president of the studio. We have had the good fortune of pitching a president of a studio once, and he bought it in the room, and that is a completely different scenario. Most of the time, you're pitching a VP or a creative executive, and their job then is to bring your pitch, which is literally nothing but their notes, and they have to bring that to their bosses and go, hey, I just heard this amazing pitch. It's by Ben and Jake. So-and-so's attached. We got this producer. And the boss goes, okay, what's it about? If they can't clearly tell them what it's about, you probably haven't sold it. If your package is good enough, and
totally. To get around it. It's like, it's kind of like this, but honestly, the director's great and it's got Charlize Theron attached. Like, okay, fine, buy it.
Right. I mean, that's like a whole other scenario, right? But let's, most of the time, they need to go to their boss and they need to say, hey, do we want to do this kind of movie? Mm-hmm. And it has this kind of a set piece, and it has this kind of a actor, a lead, and whatever. So again, creatively, find those moments, those things that stick out. Because from a business perspective, it's the only way you're going to get that boulder up that hill a little bit further. And then there's the Q&A.
So let's just talk about this for a while. So The Q&A is going to be the moment where, like the name suggests, the executive or the producer, whatever level you're at, is going to ask you questions about the story.
Yep.
And there are some kind of stock questions that you hear a lot. We had this very recently. One of the stock questions is, can you go into a little bit more depth about the character's arc? And I feel that's a stock question that executives...
And you probably have already said it in your pitch.
You probably have. And they just want to hear you say it again in a, just in isolation.
Sometimes they don't even want to hear it. Sometimes it's just because they want to have a question.
They need to have a question. Exactly right. But again, you need to be able... Anyway, point being, you need to have so much more than just your pitch worked out.
Yeah.
You need to have the world. You need to have all the arcs worked out. Your pitch is basically the tip of the iceberg on your story. This is what you're presenting to the world. But ultimately, there's so much rich stuff underneath it that you should, as the writer and creator, have already worked out and fully developed. You may come to a moment where you've got your pitch and you're like, it's running too long. It's running too long. What can I take out that's not necessary for the pitch, but I know will be a question in the Q&A? You've got all of that stuff. I mean, here's the thing. Occasionally, though, we've been blindsided by questions in the Q&A.
Oh, yeah.
Many times. You know what? I hadn't thought about that, And honestly, you have to become really good at bullshitting.
Yeah, you gotta come up with it on the fly. You really do.
Never
want to say, I don't know.
Yeah. Or, it's funny, I've never thought about that.
Yeah, that's not.
Here's what you and here's the thing. You just go, that's a really, really good question. I'm really glad that you asked that. And during those extra 5 seconds, you're formulating what the answer is going to be. And you know your
story and your characters well enough by this time. I mean, you should have spent hours and hours and hours crafting this pitch and learning this story and understanding every single bit of this movie. So when the question comes out, it shouldn't blindside you, but it does sometimes. And you got to be able to work on the fly. And sometimes it doesn't work because that answer on the fly might not be a good answer.
We had one time. It's funny, actually. Yeah. There was a project that was set up with some deadline today. And it was a book called 7 Wonders. And about 5 or 6 years ago, me and Ben pitched on that project.
It longer.
It might have even been longer ago. And had this whole great big pitch worked out. And the first question out of the producer's mouth destroyed the pitch.
Destroyed the whole pitch.
Destroyed. It was like, well, why doesn't she just do that? And it was like, what? That is and it completely stumped us.
And like, in that situation,
come back in if you figure it out. And we're like, okay. And we never did.
That was nice of them to actually say that. They liked enough of the pitch, but they were like, there's no way we can buy this without this answer. In that case, again, learning experiences, we tried to figure it out. We couldn't, and we never actually went back in. And here it is being sold today. So had we spent the extra time and energy to figure that out, who knows?
And it's got Similio and Justin Lin.
But the reality is the Q&A, I think in our experience, the longer the Q&A, the better. The more they want to know. And now there's 2 different types of Q&As. There are questions that are pointed at holes, which that's when you're fucked. And then there's questions that are, I want to know more. Yeah. Because you've intrigued me so much. Could you tell me more about these 2 characters and what they're going to do in the second act? Can you tell me more about, this set piece that you described? Or can you tell me more about, how the third act unfolds? Those are the kind of questions that hopefully are because they're actually really thinking of buying this project. Questions of, I'm not quite sure I understand why that character's in the movie.
We had that once, didn't we? We did.
And you go, well, because we wanted to have da-da-da-da, and they go, yeah, but do they add anything? And you're going, fuck. Like, this is a pointed question, because part of their job really is to figure out why should they say no. There's two things that an executive is thinking about when you're pitching this story. And this applies to specs as well. Number one, is this a great movie that when I bring it to my boss, they're going to be impressed by me? And number two, is this the kind of movie that somebody else is going to buy and I'm going to get fucked because I didn't place an offer on it?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Their job is to kind of just determine that in the room and afterwards, but also they're looking for reasons to say no. Buying things is expensive. They only have so much of a budget and they need to be ultra critical.
Yeah.
You know, there have been times where we have asked, you know, okay, do you have any questions? And people have literally said, no, I think we're good. And that is the kiss of death. Like, honestly, you leave the room going, oh, great, they understood everything.
Yeah,
That's how we did our jobs. Awesome. Yeah. And they could be the nicest people in the room.
Did we have, I feel like we had one time where there weren't many questions and we left going, oh, that wasn't good. But then they did place, I can't quite remember what that was, but I think that I vaguely remember. Anyway, but generally, I think that's right.
And here's the thing, and I want to be clear again, and this is all, I'll repeat it 100 times on this podcast. There is no one knows anything. We can't guarantee you that any of this will happen to you. This is just our experience. But let's play out the best case scenario, which is the executive is so excited. They've asked all kinds of things. They had an assistant in the room who took all the great notes, so they have plenty to go to their boss with. And you get the call later that day sometimes. Yeah. Nowadays, everyone's saying it's taking way longer, but we used to get calls that afternoon.
We did.
But you get the call that says, we'd like to buy this pitch. And then you're doing great. Now, the thing about selling a pitch business-wise is you're not going to make as much as a spec.
That's right.
It's a very different process. They're now hiring you to write essentially what you would have done on spec.
Yeah.
So that's a different type of payment.
It is. It is. And unfortunately, deals are still constructed as one-step deals for most of the time at the moment. So a one-step deal means they are only going to pay you for one draft.
So fight like hell for two.
Fight like hell for two. If you can get two, that's rad.
The hardest thing is to write a spec, and we have done, well, it's not a spec, to write a draft of a pitch. This literally happened to us on our fourth pitch that we sold. It was a movie. We loved it. We got to write one draft. The head of the studio decided that they didn't want to go forward because of a conflict with another studio. Had we had a second step built in that they were required to pay us, they would have had two options. They could have come to us and said, here's the conflict. Is there a way to work around it? Mm-hmm. In which case we as brilliant writers would have come up with that idea and had a second bite at the apple.
And it modern day.
Yeah, whatever it might have been. Or they just buy you out of your contract and at least you get more money.
This is true. And again, we've had that. We've been bought out of contracts. You go, hey, there are more steps to do, but we're not going to move forward with this. So just here's some money, go away.
But I will say you're right, Jake. Most feature pitches, sadly, have gone down to one step. The Guild is trying to make that not a thing.
Yeah, I think they're trying to do it for more younger writers, newer writers, with them more experience.
If they're paying you scale, then they need to pay you two steps.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I don't know what the initiative is. We're above scale writers, so we make a good amount of money on that first step. But it's what's so difficult with a first step on a pitch, and this is something you always have to remember when you're doing a pitch. The moment you hit send on that first draft, it's not yours anymore. Your ideas, they bought it. It's theirs. You just did a work for hire for them. It's their idea now. And they do not have to hire you again. Mm-hmm. They could decide you did enough, but they're going to go with a different writer to try and get it over the line. Mm-hmm. They could decide that the draft itself just isn't good enough and maybe they were wrong at buying the pitch in the first place. Mm-hmm. And here's where another business thing does come in. You'll write a draft. So you sell a pitch and you have a creative meeting. always you'll have a creative meeting, whether you sell a spec or a pitch, because you'll be commenced on your next step. If it's a spec, it's going to be a rewrite. If it's a pitch, it's going to be your first draft. You'll have that creative meeting and you'll talk with the executive about what they liked and what they didn't like about your pitch, what they are thinking in terms of the movie. They will have their thoughts. If you have a package, a director or an actor, the executive will almost like you defer to the director's ideas. You'll basically be writing the script that the director is interested in doing. And then you'll go away from that creative meeting, you'll write your draft, and you'll want to send that draft into the studio because that's when you get paid. But don't send the draft to the studio. Send the draft to your producer. Send the draft, if you have a director, to the director. Send the draft to the star, if you have the star, depending on what the producer thinks and what the relationship is. You want notes. You want notes, and you want to do a draft for them. And it's hard because, again, it goes against guild policy. Technically, you're not supposed to work for free, but let me just
again, here's the thing. I'm not working for the producer. I'm not working for the director. I'm not working for the actor. I'm working for the studio. I'm not going to send it to the studio and do studio notes.
Yes.
But I want the draft that we are sending in to the studio to be the best draft possible that everyone on our side is behind.
You want them, you want the director calling the executive going, I fucking love
this. Exactly right. So, I agree. You should not do notes for your employer. The employer is the student. Now, here's the thing. What's the line? You cannot and should not be doing seismic notes for a producer. I think we talked about this in an earlier episode, whereby they go, Act 2 doesn't work, it's completely wrong. Well, this is what you pitched,
Unless the studio told you to do. You're doing the studio's notes. If your executive told you in your creative meeting, we need to rethink Act 2, well, then you better fucking rethink Act 2. But
generally, we've experienced, producer notes have been tweaks on what exists already. Sometimes they're small, sometimes they're bigger. They have been bigger sometimes, but they've never been, oh my goodness, I've got to throw everything out. But this is why you should factor in that time when you're planning out how long you have to write on a screen. But anyway, we're getting into another aspect.
It's a whole other thing. And I am going to pause the conversation because what we've just talked about now is the idea of pitching an original idea. From a business perspective. There are lots of other pitches. There are pitching on jobs. I think we should do that on a different day.
I agree.
Because it's a whole other process.